be recorded and posted. I will send you copies of the PowerPoints, and also we had a session this morning, so I'll be putting together a package of different templates and different things that will be coming up in the conversation. So you'll be getting something from us once this is probably tomorrow or the next day. So with that being said, everyone's muted. Please use the Q&A or the chat function if you want to chat with me. If anybody has any problems getting in, just send me a quick email and we'll go from there. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Jennifer, our specialist in board governance, and she will take it over. There you go, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Good afternoon, everybody. Such a pleasure to be with everybody today. We're going to go through the essential practices for an effective board of directors and go from the big picture to the specifics. First of all, let's define what we're talking about here. We're talking about a board of directors, and we're an organized group of people with the collective authority to control and foster an institution that is administered by qualified executive and administrative staff or staff. Governance is the act, the process, or power of governing. And no matter what type of 501c3 or what type of nonprofit organization that you have under the 501c3 code, we are all contextualized, if you will, within the legal and ethical framework. And part of that framework includes accountability, liability, and protection. We are accountable to, of course, the federal and state laws that frame us. We are also accountable to our organizations, documents like our bylaws, our articles of incorporation. We're accountable to funders and partners and donors. And of course, we're always accountable to our stakeholders, our employees, our clients, our tenants. We're liable, but we're also protected. You know, there was a time when we carried a lot of personal liability as a board member. Not anymore. Every state has in place volunteer protection laws that protect the personal assets of board members, but we aren't protected if we show gross negligence, if we don't pay our taxes or our payroll taxes, if we don't satisfy our debts or do any kind of actions that injure the corporation. In addition, we have indemnification clauses and liability insurance that also help to protect us as we carry out our role. So many of us have heard about these three major duties of board members. And again, if you're a 501c3, you're bound by this legal and ethical framework that includes these three major duties. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. And duty of care really means to exercise care. I often say to take care of because we care about. And that means that you need to act as well-informed, attentive, participative people in ways that ordinary, prudent, and reasonable people would in your deliberations and your decision-making. In duty of loyalty, we always act in good faith, in the best interest of the organization, and we put in place policies and procedures that safeguard these interests when a conflict arises, when we're unable to act in the best interest of the organization. So we have things like a conflict of interest policy that tells us what we need to do when we're faced with being in conflict with or can't act in the best interest of the organization. And duty of obedience means that we're going to obey the laws, of course, but also our mission and our policies and our procedures and our bylaws and the decisions of the board. It's important for us to understand that we can fuss and fight and carry on in the boardroom, but once a decision is made, we are bound to support that decision, and we talk about and share that decision with our publics with one unified voice through a designated spokesperson. So what do boards do? Well, it starts with the frame of the legal and ethical framework, and then we move more specifically into governance. Governance is about the exercising of a legitimate authority, direction, oversight, and control of the organization to make sure that the mission is achieved and that there's proper accounting of how we go about achieving that mission, ethical conduct of our affairs, and the impact and results of our activities. We do this through the establishment of policies and the continuous monitoring of the implementation and our internal controls. And then we do it in such a way that we ensure we balance the powers of the members, including board members, with their accountability with their primary duty of enhancing the prosperity and viability of the organization. I'm often asked what's the difference between governance and management. Here are 7 questions that Barry Bader has put together, and I think it's apropos. As a board, we need to think at the 10,000, 30,000 level, 30,000-foot level, and ask ourselves the question, if it's big, if it's core to the mission, if there's a high-level policy decision, it's about the future and positioning, if we have some red flags flying or some compliance issues to address through watchdog organizations, then it's probably going to be addressed by the board. The other thing that we want to know is, does the executive director or CEO want and need our support and help around some of this? Then we move into providing advice and then serving as advisors to the executive director. And we do these things, we carry out this governance role really in 3 modes. We always talk about fiduciary, but there's other modes of governance, including strategic and generative. And in these 3 modes of governance, and there's functions and ways that we carry them out and questions that we need to ask. So just to keep it simple, if we think about the fiduciary role, we are temporary custodians and stewards of the assets. We establish and monitor internal control. So we take care of these assets and we put in place things like financial oversight. We ensure that our audits are clean, or that if they're not, we're addressing what is supposed to be addressed in those audits as a result. Risk management, safeguards in place to protect the assets, and making sure our resources, like our budget and our money, are aligned with our mission and what we're actually doing, and reflect our priorities. Making sure the budget is balanced. And then in the case of CDCs and other organizations that serve as the parent organization for other affiliated or subsidiary organizations, making sure there's a consolidated budget and we can clearly see the impact of the financial management of our subsidiaries on the parent company or parent organization. Also, part of our fiduciary responsibility is ensuring that the organization has adequate resources to carry out its mission and to meet its promises and the obligation, and that the programs that we put in place serve the mission. So some of the questions we're going to ask in our fiduciary mode is, how are we doing? How are we doing now? How will we be doing in the future? And what do we need to do going forward? In the strategic mode, we are thinking about strategic positioning, planning, etc., and looking at plans and financing plans and strategic plans and operating plans and annual budget. We're asking ourselves, what's the plan? What's the plan? So when we look at our financials and we look at that, then we don't want to just report out numbers. We want to know, what's that telling us about our condition? What's it telling us about our future? And then we want to think strategically, how do we want to be positioned in light of some of those resources? So even when we are in the fiduciary mode, we're thinking strategically. And of course, problems arise. So we have a problem-solving mode as issues arise. If we find ourselves consistently year after year going through a few months of poor cash flow or waiting on payments from different funders at every time. We need to think about what is this saying? What kinds of problems and issues are coming up as a result? And how do we position ourselves strategically to address these issues now and then in the future? So generative, where we look at our challenges, our problems and concerns. And oftentimes we use board meetings to do that, but sometimes there's not time for that. Sometimes we pass it off to committees and look in committee meetings and spend even more time as the entire board in board retreats looking at these types of issues. So we ask ourselves, what are the issues, concerns, and our problems? These are the modes of governance that we find ourselves in. And now I'd like to spend a little time talking about, so then what do we actually do as a board? How do we carry out these governance modes? And what are our roles and responsibilities? One of our first responsibilities is to establish those policies that govern the operations of the organization and to develop, as I said, the plan for the organization, strategic, long-range, and to have input in the annual plan. We also select, hire, evaluate, and support the chief executive officer of the organization, whether it's the executive director or the CEO. And we delegate to him, her, or they the responsibility and authority to manage the organization and develop and implement annual plans, budgets that are consistent with our plans and our policies. And we serve to support and advise the executive director. We also share in the responsibility for the financial well-being of the organization. And this is twofold. We provide appropriate and timely financial oversight and monitoring internal controls. We provide oversight in the management of our investments, our endowments. But we also share in the responsibility of raising necessary income, because our role, our governing role, also includes ensuring there is a viable, sustained future for our organization. And so we participate in fundraising activities through Give and Get. And we maintain our links, our communication links and beneficial relationships with various communities, including our funders, clients, consumers, and other stakeholders to ensure the organization's relevance and success. And as we develop plans, we need to ensure that we evaluate the progress of our plans on an ongoing basis and measure the impact that we are having in fulfilling our mission. Finally, we provide for the continuous self-evaluation and renewal of the board itself. Too often we find that executive directors spend time, are the primary lead in recruiting and identifying and recruiting board members. But it's the board's responsibility to engage in self-evaluation and continuous renewal of the board. So we need to take a look at ourselves and see what we're doing well and what areas need improvement, including our planning, our fiscal management, fundraising, external relations, and policy development, the scope and depth of our composition of the board members. Do we have the skills, experience, connections, and demographics to be the most relevant and high-performing board we need to be, and the effectiveness of our recruitment and orientation of new board members. Oftentimes, again, this orientation is even left up to the executive director. We need to look periodically at our culture and how we communicate, how we treat each other, how decisions get made and communicated, and the quality of our meetings that are forums for the board's work. Are we just sitting there raising our hands and saying yay and nay and voting and rubber stamping the executive director or CEO? Are we really engaging strategic and generative discussions around key issues? The effectiveness of our structure that allows us to look at these issues a little more deeply, including the appropriateness and the contributions of various committees. And the development our conscious development of board members as future leaders of the board, making sure that there's always a pipeline of board leaders. So how do we carry these responsibilities out? Well, we need clarity. We need clarity of our mission, of course, and our priorities and plans, but we need clarity of our role and policies that guide us and expectations of one another and of the executive director. We need to have meetings, and we need an annual schedule of meetings, of both committees and board meetings. We need to step up and assume assignments, take on assignments, volunteer for assignments, not wait for assignments to be given to us, but to step up for tasks. And we handle them through individuals and work groups. And we need information and education. I'll talk about some tools in a moment, but we need to go into retreats. We need to go sign up for those free webinars and those board education workshops, making sure that people have opportunity to learn how the latest in exemplary practice. And we need to assess. We need to find out prior to going into these retreats how we're doing and what issues we need to address. There are tools that help us carry out our role. Bylaws are one tool, as is policies and procedures and plans and assessment. But orientation is key. This is something that's greatly overlooked by boards, and it's, a kind of a pay now, pay later deal. If you give someone a solid orientation to their role, to what's expected of them, and you couple that with handbooks and materials, and then engage them through their work groups and committees, people will be better prepared and more highly engaged along the year of their terms, each year of their term. And then, of course, I said board and committee meetings and minutes that reflect how our decisions are made and what decisions and actions are taken. And, of course, reports from all of our committees and our work groups and our executive director, and annual audits, as I spoke about before, and self-assessment processes and board retreats. All of these are tools to help you carry out your role. And although they may seem burdensome at times, they really are there to help us then understand and be able to carry out our three major duties and as well-informed people.
Jennifer, this is Jenny. We have a question from the audience. What do you think is the ideal size of a board?
I was hoping I would escape that before we. Well, let me just say in broadest terms, the board needs to be big enough to get the work done and small enough to manage. There are boards that are between 11 and 15, and then depending on the size of the organization and its reach, I've seen some, go up to 25. But that's, it gets pretty hard to manage. But you have to think about how you break the board's work down, how many committees you have. If you have, 3 to 5 committees, then you need enough people for at least 2 to 3 people. According to New York law, you have to have 3 people, but other places you have to have 2 or 1. How big do we need to be in order to have our committee structure that we need? So I like to think about 11 as a goal to set for smaller organizations, and 15 is pretty good to manage. Once you start getting up to 21, 25, you really better be operating with solid meeting schedules and committees and all kinds of things in place because it's going to be difficult to manage. One of the areas that I find that many CDCs and I think you say CHDOs, I think one of the areas that I find a lot of CBOs have problems with, and I know I'm not a financial person, is, making sure that board members, because they bring all kinds of skills and talents, finance may not to the table, finance and asset management may not be. And so I oftentimes, one of their skills, so I'm oftentimes pull this out as a way to help boards understand what they need to put in place around finance and asset management. First of all, we need to recruit those people who have strong knowledge of real estate practices, finance and accounting practices, asset and property management. And we need to put policies in place and procedures for how we're going to proceed to maintain and manage maintain internal controls and manage our assets. Who has authority? What we're going to do with investments and operating reserves and lines of credit, and ensure that their financial controls, procedures, reports, audits, 990 review by the board, all kinds of things that then help us carry out this role. We also need to ensure that there are safeguards in place to protect the assets and assess and manage risk. And we work with our executive directors around that risk management plan. We need to establish a finance committee to ensure that these controls, there are these people who have this expertise looking at it and helping the rest of us understand and interpret the reports and audits and 990s prior to board meetings.
Jennifer, we have another question from the audience. How can we further engage our board if they are not initiating involvement?
How can you further engage your board? Well, this is going to take your board chair and your executive committee. I think it is important that you set up, as the committee or work group structure, and I start small, think big, but start small. Identify 2 to 3 people who get it to help you convene some of these work groups and committees and get them organized and give them tasks, give them a strategic issue, give them a role, give them, something to do, and ensure that they're the ones reporting out at your board meeting. And then as an executive director, instead of making your reports all about here's what we're doing, here's who we served, here's the housing stock, think strategically yourself. What do you need from the board? What do you need the board to talk about? What do you need them to be engaged in? And for different points in your executive director's report, at different points, different segments, stop and say, here's what this means for the health and well-being of our organization. Here's what we need to do next. And here's what I need from you. And engage the board in that conversation. And as best you can, help your board chair understand the need for him, her, or they to chime in and say, okay, let's take a moment and discuss this. Board members, what do you think? Because oftentimes what we find ourselves doing in meetings is just reporting out, but we don't speak to the impact, what this means to our mission, to our money, to our policies, and what are the implications for the board in this report or this segment of the report, and what do you need from the board? So if you can think about your own report and how you can engage the board from what you're presenting rather than just throwing out statistics on what you've done, you might find that they at least begin to discuss this. And then you can turn it over, whatever things that you need to turn over to the board, you can turn it over to a committee to take it further, to take it to the next steps and bring it back to the board.
Jennifer, there's another question. What are some sources for finding people with real estate expertise without conflicts of interest?
Good luck, yeah. There won't be total, there usually is not complete total lack of conflict of interest. Sometimes there's duality of interest. When you're working with bankers and you're working with people who are in CRE in banks and all of that, and you're trying to bring them onto the board, it's not a deal breaker all the time to have a duality of interest. What we need to do is bring the person on and help them understand that while they maintain, the relationship as a CRE person, they have to sit at the board operating in the best interest of the organization. And we will do our best to protect their interests, but they have to disclose their relationship with any that might look like or be perceived as or represent a potential conflict of interest. Let us decide whether or not it is an actual, us being the board, and then what we're going to do about it. It's not always a deal breaker to have these folks at the table, but what you have to do is find the right people who can act in the best interest of the organization. And as far as sources are concerned, there are several online sources, and I'm sure depending on where you are, there's all kinds of placement assistant, board placement assistance programs and things like that. But you need to make sure that, when folks come, you find them and they're willing through their orientation, or as they talk to them as candidates, and then reaffirm through their orientation that they're willing to sit in and serve, and what that means in the best interest of the organization, and that they're willing to recuse themselves if they're not able to do that from that particular conversation. So the other thing that we want to do in carrying out our financial roles is that we want to make sure that there's a real estate and asset management or property management committee as well, and ensure that the format and the number of reports that the board reviews, reviews adequately reflects the current financial condition. Go forward, Jenny. One more. There we go. All right. Here's the other piece. We need to make sure that everybody's educated on how to read and interpret these reports and how to ask questions. And this is really important because we're going to bring community folks onto our board. We're going to bring people from different walks of life and different skills and backgrounds. And it is up to us as board members to ensure that everybody sits at the table as peers, and we can all operate collectively in the best interest. So that means I need to be able to read and interpret what's being put before me, and I need for folks to be able to explain that to me in layperson's terms. So what do we expect of individual board members? What should we expect from individual board members? Well, fiduciary oversight, we said. And we start with that because really, as I always say, nobody pays attention to the board until something goes wrong with the money. But we also expect that board members will act with integrity and in the best interest of the organization, as said earlier, that they will prepare for and participate in orientation, board meetings, retreats, annual commitment conversations. These are really, really important for us to look at and have these kinds of commitment conversations. What we've done the past year, what we're committed to doing next year, how the organization can help. We expect them to serve on and occasionally lead board committees and to make the organization their philanthropic priority. Board members must participate in fundraising nowadays. It is not, and through give and get. It is expected in funding communities and funders ask the question what percentage of your board participates in your fundraising activities at the very least. We serve as well-informed ambassadors, leveraging our networks and connecting the organization to those who can be helpful in our communities, and we are expected to attend our organization's events and participate in board recruitment processes by identifying and cultivating potential board members based on criteria that we've agreed upon. We also want to provide advice and counsel to the executive director or CEO, but we need to make sure that we stay in role and we don't micromanage him, her, or they, and participate in our assessment and planning processes. And if for any reason we're not able to carry out these responsibilities, we should be expected to contact the chair. No leader should play the role of board police chasing after non-participating people we need to establish documents and policies that say, this is what we are carrying out. These are my duties. We're going to put this in a board member agreement, a code of conduct, a annual commitment form, whatever it may be, and we're going to sign off on it every year. You can turn to me. So every year we need to take a look at certain things. Of course, the conflict of interest policy needs to be reviewed and the disclosure form needs to be completed every year. But things like code of ethics and conduct, confidentiality, the board member description and agreement, and an annual commitment form where we look at and have a discussion about, what I did last year, where I'm headed this year, what my goals are, how the organization can help support me in reaching those goals. We need to have these conversations every year, and we need to begin our year with the board by reviewing some of these documents or the results of these documents and talking about what it means for the board's work this year, just to remind everybody what they signed on to do.
Jennifer, there's another question. What should we do about a non-participating board member or a board member who is not living up to the commitment they made?
Yeah. Well, even if we said they're supposed to contact the board chair, we know that there will be folks who don't live up to their commitment. There may be. We may have that. I say to the board chair, first I'll say to the executive director, bring this to the attention of the board chair early. I say to committee chairs and board chairs, address this early. Decide what you want to do. And the first thing is, or what you want the outcome to be. Do this early. The first thing is to reach out to the person and find out what's going on. When in doubt, reach out. Find out what's going on. Also find out what you can expect in the way of commitment from them going forward. If they continue to be non-participative, I don't want to talk bylaws to anybody. What I want to do is talk options. I want to say to them, think about this, we love you, think about this, but you're not able to participate in being a board member. Here's some options you might consider. You might consider joining a committee. If you're not able to continue as a committee member, then how about being on the advisory committee and just let us call on you once or twice a year for your expertise. You have to treat even the most errant of board members with dignity, respect, and as if they're going to be a major constituent or donor, because you want them to think positively about their relationship to the organization, and you want, if at all possible, to keep them engaged in some way.
Another question, when is a good time to create a property management committee if you have one or two properties?
Now.
Okay.
Get to the, you can combine it with finance in the beginning if you're a really, really small board. But if you've got finance, audit, property, that's a lot of work for one group. So and I would say split those up if you could, but I think the earlier you start, even at least to get a task force together and put certain things in place and policies and procedures and things like that, and determine whether or not you need to continue. But I think now. So lastly, let's talk about board-staff relationship, and again, starting with serving as an advisor. The board's role, I really want to share this with you, make sure that you understand that the board's role, as we said earlier, select, evaluate, and support the ED CEO, and the CEO will seek the board's counsel, but the CEO has to keep the board educated and informed in a timely way, in a thorough way, without going too far down into the weeds. We've got to keep the board at the 10,000, 30,000 foot level. And so we have to make sure that we remind them and bring them back to direction and policy. And we do approve policies and goals, but if you think you're going to do that or even develop policies or develop goals of any kind without the CEO, the people who are going to implement it every day, you may be basing those policies and those goals in an unrealistic context. We want to make sure that we have, as CEOs and EDs, recommendations around goals and policies. We do make major decisions, but we do that with the help and the assistance of the executive director who frames those decisions in the context of the priorities and the mission, and to bring well-documented recommendations to the board from the executive director. And we do all participate in board performance, organizational performance, AD and CEO performance. And again, we have our roles to play. And we all serve as external advocates and informed ambassadors. But again, the CEO, ED, sets the stage for all of this by bringing us information from which we then can move and do what we need, move forward and do what we need to do. The only other thing that I want to say about this relationship is that we want to make sure that we have a shared vision and goals, that we work together and communicate, and that relationship between the board chair and the ED or CEO is solid, and that it includes mutual respect and feedback across the board, but certainly within that relationship. And that we always, and the ways in which we do this, again, is we have clarity and understanding of our expectations, our direction, our mission, what we're trying to achieve, and the ways we'll go about it, and who's going to do what related to all of that.
Jennifer, there's another question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
How should a board member handle it when approached by a staff member about issues they are having with the executive director?
Redirect. Here's the thing, redirect. Most organizations, if it's about money and fraud and embezzlement or mishandling of money or whatever, there are policies and procedures in place for addressing. If it's complaints about how they're being managed, the policy, the HR policies and all of that will speak to this. I always, as part of the orientation and as part of the board portal and board center where we house our documents, always include the whistleblower policy, the cogent points or cogent policies from handbooks and personnel or human resources policies all need to be on the board portal when the board is involved. So the first thing you need to do is redirect the person back to what the organization has already said is supposed to happen in these instances. Find out about this yourself, and then next, have a conversation with the board chair. It really, and if they really are afraid to do anything, or go to the ED or whatever, you should have policies in place to say what the next steps are and to follow through on those next steps. But in no way would I say continue to engage the staff member without checking policies and procedures first and having a conversation with your board chair.
Jennifer, there's another question. What is the best way for an executive director to leave an organization with minimum interruption, i.e. funders and staff?
You must have a succession plan in place. Even if you don't, listen folks, if you don't intend to leave, every organization should have at least an emergency succession plan for business continuity, and if you can, I always expand it to a full-blown succession plan. And the best time to do this is when the executive director or CEO is not thinking of leaving, because no one's in the panic mode. This is so very important. For so many of us, we don't have a second in command. We don't have, or if we do, there's automatic assumption that that person is going to take over for us when we're planned or unplanned absences. But the board hasn't approved that. And so please, I would encourage you to assemble a succession plan.
Jennifer, thank you. Keep the questions coming, folks. And in the meantime, we're going to switch over to Vanessa Ryan, who's the director of our Government Contracts Management Division. And she's going to tell you everything you've ever wanted to know about Section 4 Capacity Building Program. Take it away. Okay, wait.
I don't know if it's everything you've ever wanted to know, but I will provide a quick overview and take lots of questions if anybody has any. This is really just an overview and to sort of let you know about some of the responsibilities and program requirements and how we administer the program at LISC. So first, thank you. As Ginny said, I am the director of LISC Grants and Contracts Management Department. I've actually been at the company for about 15 years, and I've spent most of my time working on this program, so I'm really happy to talk with you all about it today. So just a little bit of background about the Section 4 program. It was created in 1993 for the explicit purpose of building the capacity and the ability of CDCs and CHODOs to carry out community development activities and economic development activities that benefit low to moderate income families and people. And just for your reference, HUD actually defines low to moderate income households and people as income that doesn't exceed 80% of the area median income. And specifically, low income people under this program are considered with income, earning income that doesn't exceed 50% of AMI. So just for your reference, because those terms will be mentioned a little bit as we talk about Section 4. So LISC is one of 3 intermediaries that administer and who are eligible to administer the Section 4 program. LISC in particular, we've deployed about $190 million since the program's inception to about 1,200 CDCs in 46 states. And we do that through our local programs. We have 33 urban programs in 7 rural program offices. And because LISC is really a locally based, organization, the local program staff and the national program staff really administer this program in partnership. The local program staff focus on, assessing CDC capacity need. The relationship really lies. The CDC and LISC relationship really lies at the local level. They monitor grant activity, they approve payments, and they provide lots and lots of TA and training. So that's how they're really touching the Section 4 program and assisting CDCs to administer and to receive that funding. At the national level, we're mostly supplying and providing support to our national staff for providing the support to the CDCs. But we do also provide, we create a lot of TA and resources and training opportunities as well that can be passed down to your organizations. We also are responsible for a lot of the admin work. It's okay, Jenny. A lot of the admin work too, such as reporting and that sort of thing, and we approve grants. So just so you know how national and LISC and local LISC staff work together to administer the program and to support our CDC partners. So Section 4 is pretty unique. And then first, again, going back to the why it was created, that it's specifically designed for CDC and CHODOs and to build their capacity. A second uniqueness, I would say, of the program is that HUD took it a step further. While a lot of us know CDC as like a general industry term, as organizations that provide, that carry out community development activities, under the HUD Section 4 program, a CDC is actually defined, and HUD took it to that next step. They created eligibility criteria, and so only organizations that meet these criteria are eligible for funding under this program. So I'm just going to walk through some of the main eligibility requirements so that you're aware. Particularly, Jenny mentioned that there are a couple of organizations maybe preparing themselves to receive Section 4 funding, so just that you're sort of aware of the eligibility criteria necessary. So number one, an organization first and foremost must have a 501c3 or 4 status under the IRS. So that tax exemption is necessary. Additionally, their primary purpose, their services, mission, their work and activities must benefit low to moderate income people, as also described as in the program's purpose. Additionally, the SCDC must be governed by a board of directors, and that board must have local representation. That can be civic leaders, that can be community residents, business owners, any kind of local stakeholder, but HUD wants the CDC to have the voice of the community sitting on the board. Of course, the organization shouldn't be controlled or in the direction of people, individuals, entities that would like to receive some kind of financial gain or profit from the organization. So obviously a nonprofit. And finally, a really important one that Jennifer really alluded to, or spoke about a few minutes ago, was the financial accountability. An organization must have standards of accountability, and what the government means by that specifically is, good accounting systems that can track revenue and expenses, policies and procedures in place, internal controls, and an organization must be, their financials, their business practices must be reviewed by an external independent auditor. So all of that needs to be in place for an organization to be eligible to receive funding from one of the 3 intermediaries. In terms of the eligible activities and allowable costs, I really consider it being broken into 3 buckets. The first bucket is really the program bucket, and that is the kinds of costs that the program was designed to support. One, going back again to the activities must be primarily support low to moderate income households and people. And secondly, the costs and activities should contribute to a CDC's growth. And that is, it is a capacity building program. The intent of the program is to get a CDC operationally or programmatically to the next level. So whether that is programmatic implementation, assessment, or paying for back of the office systems or staffing, training, it's anything to get that CDC to the next level. And so costs should contribute to that, to the CDC getting there. So those are really the purposes, the program purposes of, the cost should be contributing to those kinds of program purposes. The second bucket is a big one, and that's the allowable expenses as per federal regulations. So the government, there's a lot of things the government wants to pay for and a lot of things the government doesn't want to pay for. We call them unallowable expenses for the funds that the government, or the kinds of expenses and costs the government doesn't want to pay for. The ones that stand out the most to us, that are always red flags and that we always have to sort of take a second look at, maybe propose other uses, are marketing costs, fundraising, grant development, any lobbying or advocacy costs. The government doesn't want to pay for those. So the CDCs must use, because these are federal, Section 4 is a federally funded program, it must be allowable expenses. The good news is CDCs don't have to figure that out on their own. LISC staff will provide lots of guidance about what we can and can't pay for, and what kinds of activities we can and can't pay for. So CDCs will have lots of support around figuring those types of things out. And finally, LISC has a particular rule that we generally don't pay for hard construction costs, bricks and mortar construction costs with Section 4 funding. And that's not a federal requirement. It's just really because those kinds of costs trigger lots of other requirements that really bog down these capacity building funds because, they trigger environmental reviews and Davis-Bacon requirements and lots of things that we think kind of take away from the capacity building purpose. So as a general rule, LISC does not pay for those kinds of costs. Okay, now here's the big one. So unfortunately, federal funding comes with lots and lots of strings and requirements. It's just the way it is. And so what we wanted to do is what I wanted to do today is just go over some of the main responsibilities. By subrecipient, we mean grantee, CDC responsibilities. And just kind of go over some of the main responsibilities that an organization, must contend with if they're going to be administering or receiving Section 4 funding or any federal funding in general. So the first one is that an organization must maintain a current SAM registration. Now, SAM is a very generic term. It's System Award Management System. It's basically the federal government's vendor registration system. It's fairly easy to get a SAM registration, and it's also you have to renew it once a year, and that's pretty straightforward as well. So it doesn't take too much time or too much effort, but an organization must have a current registration in order to receive federal funds, including Section 4. Additionally, the government wants you to be in good standing, so you have to be current with federal tax obligations and federal debt. Additionally, an organization must have policies and procedures, and they can be approved by the board or by some other management structure designated by the board. Organization, so with all grant funding, and particularly with federal funding and government funding, usually there is some kind of program progress and financial reporting requirement that comes along with receiving grant funds. So a CDC must comply with whatever requirements. They're always laid out in one of our grant contracts, and also the LISC staff, again, will provide support and letting the CDC know deadlines and what's required. Additionally, an organization must maintain proper documentation for grant expenses. But the good news is, again, they don't have to figure that out for themselves. LISC staff will be there to provide support to let an organization know what kinds of documentation will be required by the type of expenses that we're paying for with the Section 4 grant funds. Going back to the financial accountability, an organization must maintain standards of financial management and systems of internal controls. The government wants to make sure their funds are safe. So again, it goes back to having a financial infrastructure and a system of internal controls to ensure that the funds are well managed. An organization must also have time and effort reporting for salary expenses. And what that means is that if we're paying for a position or a grant funds are paying for a position within an organization, the government wants to know how much time that person's spending on that grant activity. So they must record their time and show how much time is being spent on achieving the outcomes or scope of the grant. And that should be written documentation. In terms of procurement, an organization must have a written guidelines on how to select vendors or consultants or to buy supplies. And they have to fall, because these, again, are federal funds, within the federal regulations. Now, procurement policies should be written to match the size of your organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So, they do have to fall within, the federal guidelines. Again, lots of LISC staff, including my department at LISC, is well-versed on those guidelines and can provide TA and support around developing a procurement policy and provide some guidance around that. And finally, organizations must comply with LISC monitoring conditions. So we are required, as a part of our own contract with HUD, to conduct on-site monitoring visits where we review grant documentation, policies and procedures. We talk usually with the CFO or an executive director. We also conduct, in some cases, desk reviews or ask for information, maybe because HUD or someone else is asking us for that information. So it's just and organizations must comply. This is also part of our written contracts, but just comply with those kinds of reviews and requests for information. So in the end, it is quite a bit, and that's just unfortunately the way it is with government funding. What I can say is, what I find so great about LISC is that we do provide lots and lots of support around, or to organizations that are administering these funds. So, there's no organization going it alone. If we do find places where we can provide support, technical assistance, resources, we can offer that. And then also, by putting all these systems in place and these processes in place, it opens the door for more in future federal funding from other funders and other sources. So at that, I'll leave it open in case anybody had any questions about Section 4 program in particular or about eligibility or anything like that. I'm open.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Sorry, thank you, Vanessa. I do have one question here for Jennifer. What are some of the challenges a CHOTO might face, given the requirement that at least 1/3 of their boards must represent low-income community or elected representatives? And how do you suggest they meet this challenge?
Well, to me, if you bring on people, can everybody hear me?
No, we're having a hard, the connection is bad.
Okay. How about now? Is this better? Hello? Hello? I can't hear. Oh,
can you hear me,
hello?
Jennifer?
Oh, now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
So
somebody wants me to repeat the question. What are some of the challenges a CHOTO might face, given the requirement that at least 1/3 of their boards must represent low-income community or elected representatives? And how do you suggest they meet this challenge?
Very quickly, I can say that bringing people on to represent solely is one of the challenges that I see. When you bring community residents on and you bring on elected officials onto your board, you have that kind of duality of interest, especially if they're tenants in your building or the elected officials from your district. You have these duality of interest. I think it's important for us to bring people on with that in mind and make sure that we fulfill that requirement, but we bring them on because they bring something to the table as well, and that they're willing to work at whatever they bring to the table. And so community residents oftentimes have, community connections. They have other skills, and we need to look and talk to people about what their interests are, what their expertise is, and how we can put them to use. As far as elected officials are concerned, we need to make sure that they understand what it means to act in the best interest of the organization, and that we are looking for and we seek to bring on those representatives or those folks who will be able to do that. And if there's an issue because of conflict of interest, that they will be willing to disclose it and follow our procedures for removing themselves from the discussion. It's not always a deal breaker. In fact, we're required to do that by law, but we don't want to bring anybody on to represent anything. We want to bring them on because they reflect what we have to do, what we're required to do and who we serve, and then put them to work in a unified way towards shared and common goals and our shared vision. So make sure that we identify folks because of what they can do and just cast our net wide enough to include community residents, elected officials, and what we're required to the pool we're required to recruit from.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Vanessa. All very helpful. And just to let everybody know, I will be sending out the PowerPoint. We'll be sending out templates. We'll be sending out a link to the recording. Please I have a survey, very short one. Tell us what else we can bring to you, and we will do so. So thanks, everyone. 6 o'clock, and we're on time. So have a good day. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Vanessa.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody in the audience.
Thanks, Vanessa. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.